was kind of maybe like the defining feature of finding out that, hey, this is me as a writer? Because we've got some young writers that are going to be listening, so it's an interesting process. I'd love to hear about it.
Oh man, that's a good question. For so long as a writer, I felt like I was trying to dial in my voice. I felt like I took myself too seriously. So I was like, I have to find this voice, but then when I was realistic with myself, I found that it was all derivative. I was always imitating another voice or conglomerating, other writers and their style, which is healthy. Actually, I see that now. So young writers, there's actually a phenomenon when you're really into reading someone and you start writing. It's natural to find yourself imitating that person a lot in your writing, and a lot of people give up at that point. But and this applies to my overall story you're asking about, it, and that is I call it. You could do something called boiling it off later. Like if you feel like you're onto something and you're writing, and you go, oh, this is pretty derivative, but you feel it. It tugs at you. There's some core about it that you're into that you feel. Go with it anyway, because that's what the editing stage is for, right? You can boil off all the influence and the derivative stuff and keep. Of course, all writing is derivative since the first person wrote, and that's the balance is trying to figure out how do I have my original voice. So it took a lot of learning to forgive myself, to be patient with myself, that I wanted to be that writer who who starts out at a young age and is like this prodigy and this brilliant writer, and those people exist, but I think a lot of writing is just slogging away at it. Somebody once said, I hate to write, but I love to have written." Because the slog is just, like I said, I put in years and years and years of writing stuff that just didn't quite. And of course, I was different as a person. In my 30s, when I had this major life change, it was a whole worldview change, a whole way of looking at the universe change for the
Hmm.
better. But I feel like I settled more into who I am in my life. And so I was able to settle more into who I am as a writer. Not that I've got that completely dialed in. I sort of feel like that's a lifelong process. I don't know if that answered your question.
I think it does. So what I'm hearing is, I guess the advice to the young writers is, if you end up kind of imitating some of your favorite writers, totally okay. That's what the editing stage is for. You're going to revise and you're going to make it better and make your own voice stand out. It's going to help you figure out your own voice and
Mhm.
forgive yourself for not necessarily maybe from the first get go writing exactly what you think you need to be writing or writing. Just go for it and you'll eventually settle into who you are as a writer and what you need to be writing.
Right, because I feel like what I look back on it now and think is I was auditioning all these ways of writing. I was trying things out, and like, yeah, I'm sure there's somebody out there who's born lucky and has their original writer's voice and takes off with it. And but I think for most of us, it's trial and error, trial and error, trial and error. I try to tell my students like this idea that writing. See, when I was younger, I felt like I was an artifact. When I wrote something, it needed to be just so. And really, I didn't even respect the editing phase because I thought if it doesn't come out like it's supposed to, then really, what's it worth? Especially with poetry, it took
Yes.
me a long time with poetry. Like I was supposed to write it once, and the meter's good, if there's rhymes, it's perfect, all this stuff. Man, it's just the truth is, it's just writing is just trial and error and discouragement and encouragement. And I don't want to make it sound negative. I love it, but it's just a lot of work. They say you have to do 10,000 hours or something to be an expert at it or whatever that
Yeah.
phrase is. I feel like I put in 10,000 hours in the writing, and a lot of it trash. Not because it was necessarily terrible, but it was not what I wanted to say, how I wanted to say it. And I found that very frustrating in my youth. Mhm.
I empathize with that because obviously being a young writer who's really for the first time in her life trying to uh, put my all into this. I have those days where I write something or my plot is falling apart and I'm thinking to myself, like, this is all so awful. Why would I do this to myself? And I want to quit and I hate it. But I like you mentioned that obsession is there. I actually call it an affliction because I feel like it's just something that most of us have been affected with since we were kids, and it's almost like this, yeah, this obsession, this insane feeling of like I have to do this no matter what. And I feel like all the really good writers, at least from what I can tell, have always felt like that. And
Yeah.
they're going to do it whether they're broke, whether they're rich, whether it's going really well, everybody's reading it, nobody's reading it. Like it's just this one thing that once it gets its claws into you, you're not going away. Like it's just
Yeah.
you're stuck with
Well,
it.
having said that, I also think of a young writer who does like I did, which is like felt bad about myself a lot that I wasn't disciplined enough. Like I would hear writers say things like I must write. And it turns out, looking back, I did feel that way, but I felt guilty that I wasn't writing enough. Like that's what I say about self forgiveness and patience with the self. It's like I felt like all those years that I wasn't doing enough. I was never hitting it as hard as I should be, um, and that in itself is a problem. Yeah, well, even as I'm writing, sometimes now, for instance, to put it in a micro scale, I sometimes when I'm writing now, I realize this paragraph sucks. Like I'm lost, but then I remember where was I headed, and I just go ahead and write the bad stuff. And so let it be bad. I mean, I can, again, the editing process, is so important. I can go back and edit out the bad stuff, but sometimes I need to just write the bad stuff as a bridge to get to that next part that I need to get out of me. And it seems like I can't skip to it. The brain is weird. So I'm like, I can't just skip to the good part. I feel like I have to arrive there. So go ahead and write the bad stuff. It's not permanent. And it's not an artifact that you're supposed to just plop out at once. It is this straining, yearning, sort of dialing it in, hacking it apart, reshaping it thing. So there has to be some freedom and confidence to write badly. I tell my students all the time, most of you are not writers. You have to become a bad writer before you can become a good writer. They want to skip right to good writing. And there are geniuses out there who do that, I'm sure, but for most of us, you just got to write badly first.
That is some excellent sage advice. Write the bad stuff and edit it out later, and you'll figure it out eventually. Which I
Yes,
have
yeah,
to think about as well, because I definitely am a perfectionist, and I think about how if this isn't absolutely perfect the first time I write it, what's the point? I'm clearly not cut out for this. But
right.
I'm even through this novel that I just finished, I'm thinking back on it and I'm thinking about all the parts already that I'm going to cut out that I can imagine that are just going to have to be tweaked and everything. And kind of going through this process of the last year of really just finishing this novel, I'm coming to realize everything you're saying. Like it's just whatever didn't work, just hit backspace, delete it, keep the good stuff, add a few more good stuff, and it'll be okay. I hope.
Yeah. And I've even got to the point where I don't delete much. What I do is I start once a project is actually underway, I start a separate file that I call orphans. And these are like sections, sentences, paragraphs, whatever that is like that doesn't have a home. But I never know later when I'm going to come to around to a place in the project I didn't envision. I got a well to go to there. A lot of it just ends up not being used, of course, but it's psychological too. Like I try not to disrespect any of my writing, even the terrible stuff. Like it's so informative to have that, even if it's just in a file where I can go, I did that, I did that. But it's a reminder in an odd way, it's uplifting rather than to me. For me, it's uplifting rather than discouraging to keep myself in check with. Because if you think about it, it's an odd form of self deprecating ego to go. Everything I write must be perfect. That perfectionism, it can be deadly to writing.
Yes.
Really, it can
I can
make
be
you
deadly
abandon
to
projects.
yeah, to anything really. I just art, I feel like in general, I mean, school, like I was kind of like that in school if I didn't get all A's or if I had one bad test or something. Or even I knew other people who were like that too. They were like, "Oh my god, I need to change my degree. I'm not cut out for what I want to go to medical school later. I'm not cut out for it because I got a C on one genetics test." And it's like overall grand scheme of things, it's not actually that bad.
Well, and I'm not a sculptor, but So if you know more about tactile art than I do, I can be corrected, obviously. But I doubt that most sculptors do the sculpture the first time. I'm sure they have models and they have marble they threw out back with a string of cuss words because they hacked it until it was misshapen and couldn't use it anymore, and they probably went and drank and laid around and felt terrible about themselves. But I don't think. I doubt there's many sculptors who just got a piece of marble, chink, 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 done. But we can see that when it comes to other things, even like, say, designing a car. So nobody sits down in those places that design cars and designs a car from scratch. Boom, done. You start, you stop. Here's my car. That's just not realistic, and we wouldn't expect it of any creative endeavor. And yet, we as writers expect it of ourselves.
That's yeah, it's weird. It's like this weird yeah, this odd belief that it has to be perfect the first time. And to add on to your example, the car example, I know with SpaceX, the first, I think it was either 5 or 6 rocket ships that they built, like completely blew up. They didn't make it into orbit at all. They just were complete failures. And then it was only the 6th or 7th one that was the golden child that actually did what it was supposed to.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's like, okay, you're gonna have to write maybe 6 drafts of your novel before you hit the 7th draft. That's the perfect piece of work that you can finally put out there. So, if Elon Musk is out there failing and paying hundreds of thousands of dollars and he's okay, I think you'll be okay with your writing. I feel to those of you that are discouraged.
One of my heroes as a writer is Flannery O'Connor. We don't share a worldview, but I loved her writing anyway. And one of my favorite stories by her is Good Country People, and I think I read somewhere that was the 22nd draft of that story, which she pointed out feels like when you read it that it took no effort at all. But 22 times I think I read that how many drafts she did of that story.
That is unimaginable for me right now at the stage that I'm in. I'm like kind of dreading the second draft already, but that's okay. 20 more drafts to go after that. But that's kind of the whole point, right? Like I know there's a quote. I never remember who said it, but they say, the first draft is to kind of just get everything out on the page, and the second time you do it, you kind of make it look like you knew what you were doing the entire time, even though you didn't.
Right.
And so that might take 10 drafts or 22 or 5. And, no one's going to know when the book comes out. No one's going to
Right.
know that it took you 17 drafts in 3 years to do it.
Yep. And you feel like a fraud, especially when you're younger. You feel like a fraud. I did. Like, it's a secret that I had to do all this messing with it because when I wrote it in the fever, and I think this is a good thing, when you're writing in a fever, it feels perfect to you. It's like, boom, I'm getting this down. But I think what you're feeling there is the beats. You're feeling the ideas come together. But of course, when you're in that zone, that even can detract from you leave words out of sentences, or you got a clunky sentence because you were trying to get to the next sentence, but you're so in the fever you didn't feel that bridge. And then later when you go back, you can feel like a fraud because I didn't get it right the first time. And if people knew how much work I had to put into this, then it wouldn't be as impressive and all this. It's weird when we get these these notions about creativity, but I guess that's part of what makes us creative people.
I can see why you're an English teacher. I like it. You're just like very uplifting and motivating, and you've got the experience behind you to remind all of us that we're all in the right place. We're going through the right steps, and that nothing that we're feeling is it's not normal. Like, it's normal to feel like a fraud. It's normal to think
Yes.
that, oh, this has to be perfect, but it's not, and have that self-doubt. But, eventually you kind of get some writing behind you and you realize that, hey, I can actually do this and it's not so bad.
Yeah, well, I'm an actor also, and one of the things that is so hard to dial in because you're trying to dial it in is authenticity. People want authenticity. They don't want to see you acting and putting on a show. There's a certain kind of very performative acting that's about presentation, but when you're talking naturalistic acting and stuff, people want to see authentic you. They want to see you struggle to dial in this character. And I think in writing, it's the same way. People don't expect perfection, actually. Uh, I don't know if you know what I mean by when you have a final draft that people can tell you struggled to get to say it just right. Not the kind of struggle where they're distracted by it, but it feels like this every word means something and it all ties together and is a unit. That takes a lot of struggle. It takes a lot of rethinking and rewriting and discouragement and encouragement. And I think people can sense that in writing and they like it. Rather than people thinking you're a fraud or a failure, the fact that you struggle with it means it's important to you. And if it's important to you, that's going to come across on the page, or at least it has more of a chance of coming across on the page than just writing something because you have to or for money and those kinds of things. You know, those always end up different.
Yes. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned this. People will notice if you're kind of like a fraud, and it's gonna come out. There's some controversy in the I guess book talk community. I actually don't have a TikTok, so I get all my news elsewhere. But I know that there's some controversy with a young author. Her name is Alex Astor, who wrote Light Lark. I don't know if you've heard about her at all,
I don't think so.
but she's written like a sci-fi book. She made some claims about it on TikTok. It was supposed to be a Hunger Games slash, I think it's Court of Roses and Thorns. Forgive me if that's not the right title. I've never read the book, but it's like she was supposed to be like kind of like a mix of those two with more POC characters, and she kind of marketed like that on Book Talk, and then some ARC readers got the initial copies, and she had texts that she promoted on TikTok that wasn't in the final version of the book, and now everyone is just very upset. They are digging deep into her background and like her privilege and how she has like a movie deal coming out now, and it's like, oh, her parents paid for a bunch of stuff. It's very dramatic right now, but I just makes me think of that, of how like if you're not authentic, people are gonna see it, and with the internet, they're gonna hunt you down for it. They're not just gonna
Yeah.
be like, oh, this writer, you can tell that they didn't put their heart and soul into it. They are gonna come for blood.
Yes. And, authenticity can be it can be defined in lots of ways. It could come across in lots of ways, I should say. Like your novel, if you don't mind me talking about it, I won't give anything away, but it's kind of a genre novel, and yet I sense the authenticity when I read it. That's what it's one of the things that hooks me about it as I'm reading. Is it you don't feel like that you're trying to imitate to the point of not having anything to say. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, I feel like you have things to say. You're putting them through the lens of a genre novel, but you're also not kidnapping the novel for things you want to say as a person. So you're striking this nice balance there, which I think is one of the things we're talking about. This authenticity, you can write in any genre and for any purpose. And I find when I write things that I have to write professionally or whatever, it's more fun for me, and it usually ends up better writing if I allow myself the time to breathe and to really dive myself into it, even if that means I got to burn off a lot of it before I present it. And so I will just let it all hang out, even in a professional writing, and then I can go back and chisel away at it later. But that gets that authenticity onto the page. That I found that when I have a writing assignment of any sort, I've got to give myself like 5 false starts.